This will be the continuation of Chapter 2, and what we'll be looking at now are the 3 key strategy decisions that high-tech companies must make prior to investments in the actual marketing strategies. The first question is, who are our customers? And if you think back to Chapter 1 in terms of the strategic level of marketing, the answer to this question essentially means determining which customers a company is also choosing not to serve. The second question is related to the value proposition, which is essentially addressing the issue of what is the value proposition that the company offers its customers. And we'll talk about value propositions more in a minute. The third strategy decision is how can we as a company develop our internal routines and processes in order to create and deliver on those strategic decisions regarding value. The intersection of these 3 decisions is called the strategy sweet spot, which essentially means that these 3 decisions have to be optimized in a synergistic way so that they each complement the other. Let me give a couple examples of 2 familiar companies and their very different answers to these questions, even in the same industry. When we think of mobile phones, today's mobile phones are often based in terms of ecosystem platforms, and we talk about the Apple iPhone, for example, or we might talk about a variety of Android-based phones such as those provided by HTC or Samsung. Back in time, before those were the leaders in cell phones, the Finnish company Nokia was one of the most powerful, cutting-edge, innovative cell phone companies in the world, including in the United States. And about the time that smartphones started coming on the market in a very strong way, Nokia made a strategic decision that it was no longer going to focus strictly on affluent customers in Western markets. It decided it was going to go after less affluent markets in emerging economies, often referred to as base of the pyramid markets. And if you need to review base of the pyramid and what that means, please look it up in the glossary of your book and refresh your memory. It's essentially people who are living in emerging economies of India, Brazil, China, the countries in Africa, for example. And once Nokia decided that it was going to focus on a different set of customers, essentially it needed to decide what was their value proposition going to be. In this particular case, they sent out an anthropologist. His name is Jan, J-A-N, Chipchase. And in fact, if you do a Google search on his name, you'll see he has one of the most interesting blogs using ethnographic or anthropological market research in the telecommunications industry. His research with customers in emerging markets gave insights about what customers were looking for, not only in terms of price point, but in terms of features. Nokia needed to make a phone that was under $40. It needed to make a phone that would withstand dirt, humidity, not having tables to put it on at home at night. And it needed to make sure that the power was long-lived, there weren't ready sources of electricity, perhaps solar charging, and it also needed to have different functionality. The way people in emerging markets use their phones is very different than the way people in more affluent or westernized economies do. And so, in order to create and deliver that value, Nokia had to invest in very unique distribution channels. Distribution channels in these emerging countries is not typically through retailers and telecom companies. It's typically through kiosks and trading centers in very rural areas where cell phones may in fact be shared by a village or be rented out on a temporary basis if people can't afford them. And that required a very different investment in infrastructure than Apple would make in terms of creating partnerships with established consumer electronics stores. Both of these companies have been very successful, and in fact Nokia has the greatest market share in mobile phones in terms of worldwide sales. But what you see is that each of these companies made a very different decision about this strategy sweet spot. It's not that one decision is right or wrong or better or worse. It's that they mean that there's going to be different ways to measure success in the market over time. It requires different communication strategies with customers and different infrastructure, both internally and with distribution partners. Regarding who are our customers, it's really important that in answering this question that companies focus more on customers' needs than on the technology itself. There's kind of a saying that people don't buy nails and hammers because they need nails and hammers. What they need are holes in their wall. And so looking at the need that's being met by the technology can sometimes help understand where the real opportunities in a marketplace are. And what we'll see later in the semester is that focus is critical. Apple has been on record as saying that the reason they have been so successful in what they've done is because of what they've chosen not to do. And by not diluting their efforts, for example, in pursuing base of the pyramid markets, it's allowed them to have excellence in what they do. And this is true in all of our lives. We must prioritize or we spread ourselves too thin. Related to this question number one is some important terminology that you should know as you move into technology marketing. First of all, there's this phrase called the tyranny of the served market. The word tyranny comes from the word tyrant, and the word served market, the phrase means current customers, customers who we're currently serving. And in high-tech markets, it's fairly common for companies to focus so excessively on their customers of today that they lose sight of the fact that there may be new markets emerging that they're not staying abreast of. An example of this would be in the financial services industry, where companies were so focused on serving their affluent customers with high-end trades, and the salespeople made a very lucrative commission on those trades, that when companies like E-Trade came on the scene, offering trades for individual investors that were low dollar volume at a flat fee, the Merrill Lynches of the world really struggled to keep up because they had this tyrannical focus on their existing customers. Another phrase that's important is bifocal vision. What this means is just like having glasses that allow you to see up close and far away, bifocal vision means a company's ability to simultaneously focus on our existing customers and our customers of tomorrow. Now, when we think about the U.S. car companies who haven't been able to make the switch to hybrid engines and electric engines the way Toyota has, for example, and in fact the U.S. car companies needed a buyout several years ago, a bailout from the federal government, one of the reasons that the executives of those companies gave was that it was their customers' fault that they weren't keeping abreast of changes in the industry, because they were just giving their customers what they needed, which was big gas-guzzling pickups and SUVs. Unfortunately, companies can't point to their customers and say, we're just giving them what they need, when these companies' competitors are clearly able to anticipate emerging needs And the best high-tech companies actually anticipate where customer needs will be in the future and help guide or create those markets rather than simply responding to immediate customer concerns. Hockey great Wayne Gretzky was made famous for many reasons, but one of them was his saying, "I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where I anticipate the puck is going to be." This is critical, and companies must have this future-oriented focus in order to create new markets. Blue Ocean Strategies is the title of a very famous book from the Harvard Business School. And a blue ocean strategy essentially says, let's create a new market that doesn't currently exist. And we're seeing this quite a bit in the healthcare space, where we're getting new innovations that are driven by meeting needs of impoverished consumers in rural markets like India and China who can't afford normal healthcare, nor can they get to it. And as a result, companies are inventing new ways to serve these base of the pyramid markets. And what you'll see is our technology spotlights in Chapter 2 focus on both the LifeStraw as well as cataract surgery to help meet the needs of these markets. And they've created new markets in the course of doing this. Okay, the second question in our strategy sweet spot is what value? The value proposition essentially is the statement of why customers should buy company A's product compared to company B's. And essentially it's based on the benefits that the customers will get and the ways in which their pain points or their needs will be solved by purchasing that company's products and services. And the most important thing that you see here is the product and the technology itself is not what has value. It's the problems that it solves for customers. And in order to understand this value proposition, companies must realize that they can't only look at their immediate competitors. So for example, Google in the area of search can't only look at Bing, because the fact is there are lots of different ways that people get information. And I think Google would admit it's a little bit slow, that when social networking came on, it realized that these social networking platforms that weren't set up for just search terms were actually a key way that customers were now accessing guidance and information. So in this case, value propositions require that companies look to their indirect competitors that solve customers' needs using a different type of solution. Another simple example would be if I need transportation, certainly I could buy a car. That car could be gas engine or electric engine, but I could also buy a scooter, or I could take the bus, or I could van share or ride share. So all those would be positioning my value against other solutions that solve the customer's need. Jim Anderson and Jim Naras have a really nice book called Value Merchants. And they discuss in their book 3 types of value propositions. The all benefits value proposition articulates why my product is better than other products. And it will say things like faster, more reliable, more battery life. And the consumer products analogy would be wider whites and brighter brights. And according to Anderson and Naras, this is the weakest sort of value proposition for technology companies. Another value proposition essentially says, my product or technology is better than the competition. Now you can go back to Chapter 1, and sometimes high-tech companies say, my product is so great I actually have no competition. So Elon Musk might say there's no competition for the Hyperloop. But again, even in this particular case, this overlooks the fact that there certainly is indirect competition customers are already getting from San Francisco to LA without having the Hyperloop exist. And also, Just because you do something better than the competition, for a technology customer who faces fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that's not necessarily a compelling reason to buy technology. It's risky to them. So Anderson and Nares suggest that the most compelling value proposition is a value proposition called resonating focus, which is kind of a weird phrase. I'm not sure where they came up with resonating focus. What this means is that a company actually says, when you invest in my product or when you give your money to me as a company, I will actually solve your problems, and this is the return on investment that you will get from the money that you pay to get those problems met. Now let's talk about return on investment. We're all business people. That means that if I adopt your cloud-based solution, for example, it should either lower my costs of IT services, or it should somehow allow me to increase my revenue. When technology companies face hurdles in getting their technology adopted by customers, it's typically because they haven't told the customer how they solve their pain points and validated quantitatively how that investment in technology will either increase the customer's revenue or decrease its costs. What we're going to be doing in class is we're going to be pulling some ads from technology magazines and looking at the value propositions that are there to categorize them in terms of these three types to really understand how compelling this third value proposition can be. Okay, the third circle in our strategy sweet spot talks about how do we create the right competencies. For example, maybe it's branding. How do we create internal organizational structures and processes? How do we implement our 4 Ps? And do so flexibly because technology markets are changing rapidly. This will be the focus of the subsequent chapters as we move through the semester. Okay, the rest of this chapter has important information regarding strategy. I would like to say at the outset that I'm not going to cover the rest of this chapter in detail, but I am going to cover the appendix. So let me just make a couple quick comments on a couple of the slides here. When we talk about being a pioneer in high-tech markets, the question is, does the industry leader have a first mover advantage? Is there such a thing as a pioneering advantage? And what you see here is that, yes, there are benefits to being a first mover in introducing new technology to the marketplace. And you see them listed here on the left. But there are also drawbacks to being the pioneer. And these drawbacks are actually quite large. Empirical research in the Journal of Marketing shows that the failure rate of industry pioneers is actually higher than the failure rate of what are called fast followers. And so in the case of high-tech markets, what we see is that the risks of pioneering are greater, particularly for radical innovations. I've moved to the second bullet first. The first to market with a radical innovation is the first to fail. But notice this important unless the market is characterized by these network effects where we have the installed base of customers that are very reluctant to switch to the new technology. I love this cartoon. If you're not the lead dog, the scenery never changes. This is the flip side to saying that, yeah, I think there's a benefit to being a pioneer, but pioneers also take the arrows in the back or encounter all the risks. So, two sides of the coin here. There's a really nice book by a group of professors at the University of Western Ontario. Don Barkley is one of them. They use an 8-step process for strategic marketing planning in technology-intensive businesses. Okay, one thing you all know we emphasize in marketing is that you can't manage what you don't measure, and marketing is no different. And in fact, empirical research in the Journal of Marketing shows that high-tech companies that actually know how to measure marketing performance actually perform better. And those CEOs are more happy with the marketing function than high-tech companies that don't have a well-developed marketing performance measurement capability. So what are the ways that we measure marketing performance? One of the ways that we do this is to have what's called a dashboard. And the dashboard essentially sets up, in this case, quality, customer satisfaction, loyalty, and financial results that essentially measure how are we doing on these 4 dimensions. Each company is going to have different ways to measure its marketing performance. And in fact, many companies are using Salesforce.com because they give a lovely dashboard, this is an example of it, to show how well marketing is doing in terms of generating leads and following through on leads. High-tech companies can't survive without innovation, and so it's also important to measure innovation performance. And innovation performance can be tough to measure. And what I like is that we shouldn't measure only what we actually did in terms of innovation, but we should also measure whether we missed important opportunities in the market and how well do we convert our R&D spending into commercial products. Measuring innovation performance is something that I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but we have some very nice resources that are footnoted in Chapter 2. And at this point, I'll conclude this section of Chapter 2's podcast.